I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm really glad you're here today. Sometimes I feel like this topic of narcissism, it's just like so overdone on so many channels. And then I look at the channels and I'm like, oh my gosh, there is still so much content and there are so many views around this topic. And initially I kind of didn't really want to talk about it because there are so many great creators talking about it in so many important and profound ways. But what I've realized more and more, and I do believe this, is that there are people who have been classified as narcissists who have narcissistic traits. And maybe they are actually, at the end of the spectrum in terms of a diagnosis. But the wounds so many of us are carrying at the hands of people who, for whatever reason, trauma, genetics, combinations, their story, lack true regard for us, don't have empathy, are self-righteous, entitled, need admiration, never own their behaviors. There are a lot of people who have some flavor of these patterns. And perhaps they have depression and narcissism, or some form of, for example, in men, borderline that gets diagnosed from the public as narcissism. Whatever it is, there are so many walking wounded at the hands of people who should know better, who that no matter what we say, that our trauma shapes our story. For whatever reason, these people, and this is where it gets into a true disorder, have no real insight and are never going to have that insight and awareness that they can change and or that they are part of the problem. And nowhere is that more true than around narcissistic, toxic types of fathers. And so I want to talk about what they do to us, a quick summary of kind of how they impact our lives, as I'm saying. And then I want to share with you what I believe is important to heal, because identifying these things is so incredibly important. I really believe that once you have a label, in many regards, even if the label isn't completely clinically accurate, if you can truly acknowledge, let's say, my parent is a narcissist, my father is a narcissist, or my ex-partner, or my current partner, and you really own and believe that and understand it, it then charts the course for what is possible or likely not possible in your life and your relationships. And I believe it kind of like outlines where the wounds may be and therefore where to direct the healing and treatment. So I wanted to share, this is actually just a graphic from a page I have in my workbook, but it talks about what happens to us when we have what I believe are often undiagnosed narcissistic, borderline, emotionally wounding, toxic types of parents. We see increased psychiatric, lifelong mental health issues, increased chronic physical health issues, toxic shame, toxic and chronic self-blame, often lifelong worthiness issues, repeated unhealthy relationships, trying to fill up our lives with things that will never fill us because there's a deep vacancy and hole inside that never got kind of filled with love and empathy and regard, and just never feeling good enough, having trust and control issues in your relationships, difficulty with understanding and setting and holding and maintaining boundaries, a deep loneliness, a self-isolation, and a fear about the world and relationships inside, and often difficulty with our own maturation and development. Now, this can play out in complex trauma, right? Attachment wounds, things like generalized anxiety. The list goes on and on. Even can go into things like, self-harm and dissociation, and obviously using substances, fears of abandonment. Like, it just goes on and on, because the truth is that narcissistic parents never make you feel truly seen and heard and validated. They do not know how to mirror you. It is always like you're a limb of them. You're an extension of them and what they deem as valuable. And they will be involved in your life only so much to the degree that it reflects A, what they want to do, and B, that it gives them some hit of value on what they think the purpose of you is to serve them in this world. For example, if your narcissistic father loves football and you play football, he might be the greatest coach you ever thought you could have. I mean, he won't be a great coach, but he will be there at the games. He'll support you. But let's say you're also that same man and you love ballet, you love soccer, you love painting. Not going to be there for you if he doesn't deem those things as valuable. And so you learn this very strong conditionality around a narcissistic father specifically. And at the core, they are absent. They're often physically absent. They are often clearly emotionally absent. Mentally they're absent. Only if they deem it valuable, like I'm saying, will they give you any ounce of love and regard. But at the same time, they are always the victim, and they will hold you accountable, even as a child, for having a bad relationship with them. They blame everyone but themselves. And I know that if you watch this channel, because I look at my analytics a little bit, not like I probably should, but I know that you watch a lot of other channels around these issues, and I know that you know what narcissism is. And so I'm not going to go too far into that, because I know that at the core, everything I just said, if this was your childhood or your spouse you chose, you probably know as much as anybody else could know about these issues. You know that the core wound is about their own internalized toxic shame and inability to see, their dark parts. They basically want to put all of their dark parts on others. They want to use other people as supply and energy to fill up all that vacancy and toxicity inside. And they will do this with their children without thinking twice. And they often can be kind of okay when the kids are little. They're often not really good hands-on caretakers, especially narcissistic fathers, but also could be mothers or whoever they are as the caregiver. But as a child grows and becomes more autonomous and independent and tries to individuate and separate, that becomes extremely threatening to any narcissistic parent, because you start to say, wait a minute, I don't exist to serve you and get your kudos for being who I think you want me to be. I'm not you. And the more that you do that and you don't comply, and or you don't stay in whatever golden light, that is like the golden child dynamic, right? Where you're doing and saying and reflecting all their qualities. If you're not that child, and even that child suffers a tremendous amount. But they become more and more blaming and often absent and critical and condescending. And so the wounds just keep on going, right? The hits just keep on coming. You just keep getting hurt. You never had it as a child. Now you're old enough to understand the things they do and say. And so many times I've seen clients stay in these really toxic relationships with parents because they don't know what else to do. And so let's talk about what it takes to truly heal. I made a list because I really just want to share with you at the core. Of course, I have a course on this, but the goal of this is you can leave this video, take notes, and you can seek these things out by yourself. You truly can. But you have to first understand and accept what narcissistic abuse is, and understand that if you had a narcissistic parent, you were most likely, under all circumstances, narcissistically abused yourself. You were never able to receive the safe, secure, healthy, emotional, physical, mental love that you deserved. And so you have to really own that, really understand it. And that's part of this whole knowledge base here, I think, on the internet and social media, is understanding what it is so that you could kind of begin to empower yourself to say, that's what happened to me. And it wasn't okay, but that's what it was. And this is where I kind of need to go. You want to assess your own trauma. That's number 2. Try to understand, where do you think your wounds are? Where were the traumas? Were they in relational dynamics around your passion, your body, your grades, your sense of self? Watching how they treated your other parent? Was it often in their rage, their either very externalized, scary eggshell, can flip a moment kind of rage, or just bitter, seething, victimization, kind of victim-y rage, internalized, right? There's a whole spectrum of the types of narcissism. But the truth is that there's something very aggressive inherently about narcissistic parents, and specifically fathers, I think, going back to culture and masculine dynamics and testosterone and the patriarchy. Like there's so much about it that is just like I'm here and like screw you, I will do what I want dynamic. And that might come out in them, like I'm saying, being passive aggressive and trying to make fun of you or mock you or tease you or minimize you. But it is very much about an attempt to have power and to keep and wield their power, which is extremely important to them. You want to identify your inner child wounds, like where are the parts of me inside, the child that didn't get to develop and mature, that might be stunted or wounded, that talks to myself from a place of less thanism, that is never good enough, that is scared, that is tired, that is sad or even angry at itself, and begin to understand where those little spaces need to be reloved and parented. I think it helps to identify, number 5, your attachment patterns, to understand how that parenting dynamic, even if you had the good parent who didn't act that way, they basically enabled and allowed the other parent to treat you the way that they did. And even if your good parent got divorced and did everything they could, there's the reality, especially now when kids have a lot more split custody, that you can't protect your kids for what happens at the narc parent's house once you're divorced. The family court system is so I want to say inept. I think that, given the dynamics of abuse and things like that, there's an attempt, but I really believe that when it comes to narcissists, the courts do not understand, especially successful and high functioning or very, intricately manipulative type narcissist who, if you're not looking below the surface, which most family courts have no time to do, and the attorney system fuels and all that conflict, and lawyers make money, but they don't understand the manipulation of a narcissistic father, for example, or parent. And so there's not a lot, unless it is overt, there's not a lot of intervention going on for anybody. And you're trying to give your kids the tools to deal with it, but the abuse, the condescension, the entitlement, the wounding goes on and on and on. And as I've always said, people don't understand when they say, oh, well, your kids will figure it out, and they'll understand who that person is. It's like, yeah, that sucks. I don't want them to grow up and be like, oh, I figured out what a nightmare this parent was. Because that means they never got the parent they deserved either. There's no winning in that. I mean, it's for many parents, it's like they feel redeemed when their kids get older and realize that was not okay, and I can see it now. But the wounds are done, and then they have to accept and honor that they had a toxic parent and that they'll always have a narcissistic parent too. And so it's like this ongoing horrific gift that never stops. It's not a gift, but it just keeps on giving, is what I'm saying, right? And so the gift of the pain, there's no gift in that, but there's no way to escape it. And so identifying what your attachment patterns are, how you choose partners, what you're trying to heal, where you get tripped up in relationships, where your strengths are, is really important, ideally, before you choose lifelong partners or in trying to repair from the ones that you've already chosen. You want to explore the own caregiver behaviors that you have that show up in your attachment wounds. So what I mean by that is what are the things that you do in trying to be a pleaser or a compulsive caretaker, or trying to just always be everything to everyone else because you didn't get what you deserved. But where is that serving you and is a great quality, and where does that hurt you? You want to understand the depth of narcissism in both children and adults. I mean, the parenting, what we've learned about what tends to contribute to narcissism, so that as you grow up, and if you decide to become a parent, are clear in understanding that excessive praise isn't the answer either. That can actually fuel a lack of real reality for kids. And so you want to look at those things. So understanding the depth of narcissism, kind of like I said in the beginning, not just the abuse, but the whole thing is important. You want to look at the common dynamics, like I just said, in kids. And so what we know about the research around, what kind of behaviors contribute to narcissistic parenting. And so, for example, I think it is important to know that the childhoods of those who have narcissistic qualities, outside of obviously relational trauma, which is basically all connected, is insensitive parenting. So from one end, insensitive, abandoning, neglectful parenting, all the way up to overly involved on top of the child, excessive praise and pampering, negligent care, excessive criticism and control. You might be telling yourself that, oh, I'm just trying to keep my kids respectful and in line. But when you go too far with that, you are tipping into an abusive dynamic where there is an excessive attempt to treat your children as like little soldiers and not as human beings. Coldness, lacking empathy, of course. Authoritarian, where you're just like on top of them, like I'm saying. A lack of real, authentic validation in the environment where, you see your child as a real person and a real human being. And so, of course, we're looking at things like genetics and trauma, but there are some things that are important that you might be inadvertently doing. Maybe you had a parent who was super permissive and didn't care about you, and so you're trying to parent from like always being on top of things and overly controlling. But if you go too far with that, do you see what I'm saying? Like that can create another type of wound for your child. But often we're trying to heal our own things and don't know about that. So that's important to understand. Looking at, as I kind of said earlier, which is the grief that comes up. Once you finally admit or understand that you married a narcissist, that you were raised by a narcissist or some kind of toxic person, there's a lot of grief and wound, because if you have kids together, let's say, you can't escape them. You have their pain, their trauma. You've repeated the story as I've shared. Like one of my greatest sadnesses was repeating some of the same, in many ways different, but some of the same struggles and traumas that I swore in childhood and adolescence and young adulthood that I would never put my kids in. And yet things happen that you have no control over. And so you can just really beat yourself up and live in so much shame about that and get lost and then not be able to provide healthy modeling for your kids. And so that's important. Along those lines, you want to look at things completely around, as I mentioned, toxic shame, compulsive caregiving, isolation or desperation. How much do you isolate, or are you in a place of like, love me so much? How do those patterns from a narcissistic parent show up in your life? Boundary issues, self-advocacy, enmeshment, and role reversal. This is a huge one where often narcissistic parents are like children. They're very immature and very underdeveloped. And so they will actually, like I said, blame their kids for not acting in a better role and for the relationship problems. They might overshare their adult lives. A lot of narcissistic parents will overshare their job issues and employee stuff, even to very like 8-year-old kids. It's like, why are you talking about that to a child? It's me, 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 me. And so looking at how all of that shows up. Additionally, your own anger, the anger that you had in the home, the anger that you feel now. You want to look at your conflict and self-advocacy skills, because obviously one of the core wounds of these kind of parents is having a real worthlessness about yourself, not being entitled to things like your own voice and your own things and your own rules. And so that's important. You would understand that this is complex trauma for many people, that it's not just, oh, I had that creates true trauma, which might play out in complex PTSD symptoms. And so you want to look at what those are. You want to look at mapping your body and doing polyvagal theory type work, where you're trying to understand your fight or flight, your freeze, your fawning, all of the responses, collapse, submit, attach, cry out for help, right? All of those things. Once you understand what your go-to patterns are and what your body does, then you can begin to learn to talk about how to regulate and love on yourself and create, whether it's doing a guided meditation or taking walks and trying to find ways to soothe and calm this little body that you had that was just trying to grasp at being enough and surviving these kind of parents. You want to look at what I call the core interventions are of healing from what I do believe are both borderline and narcissistic type parents. And this is really the page here. I'll put it on the screen, but it's about inner child work, guided meditations, your relational parts, how you respond, doing the ideal parent figure, which I think is a helpful attachment healing exercise, identifying the triggers in your complex trauma, managing your emotional flashbacks, your negative cognitions, your polyvagal techniques, like I said, that's your body, things like journaling, and then exercises that help you explore yourself, your goals, your identity, your dreams, your wounds. This is the stuff that kind of shows up every day we have to learn to manage for many of us. And so all of that is really important. And I like to talk about things like building mission statements. And there's a book that talks about, I think it's the Bill of Rights. It's also in the Complex PTSD book. But it's this idea that like I'm entitled to some things and rules in my adult life that I was not raised to believe I was entitled to. And I also, along those lines, also encourage my patients to create, this is kind of like circa the Tom Cruise movie, but make a mission statement for your life and your family. You know, what do you want it to look like? Kind of creating like an identity of who are we and what are our goals in this home? Do we want to focus on empathy and compassion and yes, and what does that look like, and what is not okay, and what does self-repair and ownership look like? How do we want to approach play in our family? What does that look like? Do we have a rule about too much teasing because it actually starts to become aggressive and that's not play? You know, how do we spend time together? It's like all of these things can be incredibly healing from these childhoods. And as I've talked so much about, I do believe that one of the ways that can be very healing is to parent your children in ways that your inner child long for, but not perfectly under any circumstance. You have to know I keep saying that you're going to screw up, and your kids are going to need therapy no matter what sometimes. You do the best you can. There's so much we cannot control. But to understand that some of the deepest wounds are about our worthiness, our rights to exist in this world, our value, our meaning. Because even if one of your parents was super loving and as available as possible, if you also had a toxic or narcissistic or wounding, unstable, extremely immature, whatever you want to call it, parent, then you often really you struggle. You struggle with understanding who you are and your value, and you struggle with finding healthy partners and feeling even allowed to exist and have value and meaning in who you are. It's so important. And so I really wanted to share that because I think there's so many videos about identification, but not talking about sort of where this all comes from. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you know that I truly care about your own healing here. I do. I want to share things that you find valuable. And I'm not necessarily following all of the, how to get more views, YouTube plans. I just try to find topics that I think, oh yeah, I think that matters. And I want to know, that you find it helpful. So please let me know what your thoughts are, anything you want to add, and know that I deeply appreciate you. So please stay safe and well. And I'm working on a new course on relational healing and attachment healing. And if you had parents like this, please do check out. I'm not, as I've said in a lot of videos, a great salesperson, but I believe in this course with every ounce of who I am. It is full of everything clinically and personally I know that it takes to heal from being raised by untreated, borderline, and or narcissistic parents. And I have a course on healing your inner child and your inner parent to re-mother, because mothering energy is that core of nurturing. And then a free course if you're like, I don't really know if what happened to me wasn't okay or not. Please check those out in the links down below. And also, of course, I would love for you to subscribe if you'd like to join this little growing community. We're also on TikTok where I post every day. And thanks for being here. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.